not a first, as many of these women have done, I can tell you as well. We're also delighted here to have with us Antonia Meszaros. Antonia is here, Managing Director of UNICEF in Hungary, and also Lina Al-Olaime, the social innovator and author from Bahrain. So we're happy to have her with us. And also I'm delighted to have with us virtually the Right Honourable Helen Clark joins us. She is the former Prime Minister of New Zealand and, of course, the UNDP Administrator. She's currently the Board Chair of the World Health Organization's Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health. So she's keeping incredibly busy these days. And Helen, I'm going to start with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, as we all look to a better future in terms of people and planet, you know, this is a future that really must include all of society. Women have a huge role to play. I think they're playing a huge role around the world. They always have done. But how do we actually accelerate the role of women in our new future for people and planet?
Well, sorry not to be with you all in Dubai, but greetings from New Zealand in the early hours of the morning. Look, you can't achieve the SDGs unless women and girls are fully part of the picture. We have very absolute targets in the SDGs. Eradicate poverty. Well, you know, women make up 70% of the world's poor. Unless we deal to that, we can't achieve that SDG. A similar story with the absolute goal of eradicating hunger. We can't leave women and girls behind in areas like education. We want to see girls able to reach that target too of everyone being able to have the 12 years basic education and equal opportunity going on. There's a long list of things that have to happen. Now, let's recognise that the SDGs are aspirational and they're challenging. The pandemic has made them more challenging because of the setbacks. Women disproportionately have left the workforce because of what's happened with the pandemic. Women have suffered from the domestic violence that surged during the lockdown period. More girls have left school never to return because of the way the pandemic's been managed. So we could go on. We've got a way to go. And what I would say as we meet here in 2022, we're only 8 years away from meeting the SDGs. We really have some catch up to do. Big investments in opportunity for women and enabling women to reach the very top of everything they aspire to do, whether it's politics, whether it's education, whatever it is. Women have got to be part of the story. Back to you.
And indeed, I think, it's about making sure that everybody is involved and that, we pay great attention to that. Ambassador Katalin, we look at the focus on the bigger goals of all of the SDGs. But, really, they're all interrelated. And, where does the role of women come in terms of making sure that we're looking after everything together?
So good morning and good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is very universal here. And actually, we are in a World Expo, which is women-oriented, which is universal, and which is inclusive. And these three sentences, notions, ideas are very strongly directed the whole process of the SDGs at the United Nations. And as the Prime Minister just said, that there are no targets, I would say, or goals without women involved. Yeah. So if we don't empower women, we will not be able to achieve the goals. Because, of course, Prime Minister mentioned the poverty, but think about education, gender equality, which is an overarching principle. Or just think about water and sanitation, the role of women there. Or think about the role of women in the war-torn areas, and so on and so on. So as this very special expo is women-oriented and universal, that is the same way how the SDG goals and targets came together. And of course, there were 193 countries, and I don't know how many civil societies, organizations, and NGOs who have contributed into this very special work. So it is definitely an intercultural topic, which is also a very definite role in the SDGs, because wherever we are in the world, We are all connected, and SDGs is about connection. But I just would like to mention two other elements. The UNDP already produced two reports, in 1994 and 1995. So it's not something that it came out of the blue, SDGs. You know, it has been a long process. And I rather say sustainable human development, because then we understand what we are talking about. We are not talking about only the role of women producing and taking part in the production process. We are talking about the role of women in the social development.
And that has to be absolutely number one. Christina, if I may talk to you, and when we look at, you know, how we can actually advance this. You know, you were, in one of your roles, you were head of the Equal Opportunities Office in the Council for European Union in Brussels, but also, you know, many others. But looking at, I suppose, the role of legislation, of policy, you know, where does it make a difference? And where is it working, perhaps, and where does it maybe need a little bit more encouragement?
Good, yes. Goals are aspirational. They are a plan. They are a compass to achieve the transformation. But we need to bring them to specific engagements and to monitor the engagements and the actions. And that's why legislation in every country is fundamental. That pushes, sometimes quotas, that pushes the right numbers we want to bring women in different spaces, that pushes the right legislation to make health more inclusive, to ensure that women have opportunities, education. So the role of the public policies is fundamental. And this has to be accompanied by the mobilization of the private sector. Why? Because we need entrepreneurs, men that engage women, and then women that become entrepreneurs. So the aspirational objectives of the goals, which are now, you know, much more difficult to achieve than before because of the pandemic, need a clear setup, organized setup in every country. I would suggest a sort of an engagement from the different governments that regularly check what advancements are being made, and in front of the public opinion, it becomes a transparency exercise so that we know what is being done.
And I think we'll hear that throughout our discussion too. The concept of transparency is so important to help. Daria, apart from your role in the Ministry of Labour, you're also an epidemiologist. We have a bright group up here on stage, and you're a lecturer in the Faculty of Medicine as well, and also a member of the State Serbia crisis team against COVID. Well, we just heard from Christina there talking about, you know, what has happened in terms of the pandemic and how it actually has had an impact, I guess, in terms of the role of women and the advancement. Where do you see it, and how has it actually impacted gender equality?
Thank you very much for this question. First of all, I want also to say good evening for everyone, and it is a really great honor for me to have an opportunity to discuss with these inspiring and amazing women. And now we get ready to talk about this very specific issue. And I am thinking a lot about that, because in 21st century we are still talking about gender equality. What is wrong about that? Because our role, our crucial role in the human population has been recognized since ever. We are brave, we are power, we are strong. There are no life on the earth without us. We are recognized, and the question is why we are so underestimated. And that is a question. And during the pandemic, we change our living style, our working activities, and we change our point of view from everything. And the question is, does pandemic influence the gender equality, or does make any difference concerning that gender gap? And unfortunately, all recent investigation show that it really strongly influenced. Why? First of all, when you analyze the gender-specific professions, we can see that the majority of working force in the health sectors are women. For example, more than 85% of all nurses are women. More than 90% of all long-term caregivers are also women, meaning that the women had, or unfortunately still get a chance to get coronaviruses, and also obviously they have a higher burden, professional burden during this pandemic, and also unfortunately more recent investigations show that more women compared to men lost the job during the pandemic, and finally, at least at some point during this pandemic, the schools and kindergartens are closed, meaning that the total time of unpaid work in home increased, and all investigations show that regardless are the women employed or unemployed, all that work at home are on the back of the women, meaning that they have less time to individual and professional development. And unfortunately, we will see in the following period that this influence on gender equality gap was very important, and I think that COVID make this gap even wider.
No, I think it's so true, and it's it's funny. Only the other day I met a young couple. They had their first child, and I said to my colleague who I knew who was working, I said, "This must have changed your life." He's going, "Doesn't make any difference to my life. She'll look after it." I couldn't believe he said this, but yeah, he said, "It hasn't made a bit of difference to my life. She's looking after everything,"
yes,
referring to his wife.
And sorry to interrupting you, but for example, I saw some investigation, when we investigated gender equality, we have the same questions in many investigations. Do you think that the women have the same rights as the men? And when you are looking at the men's answer, for example, more than 90% of men say, yes, they have the same rights. And when you look at the same sample of the people in female population, less than 50% of them say no, meaning that our definition of gender equality is different.
That's true, and we'll talk a lot more about this, because I think also in terms of how women come into the workforce, what they offer, how they can change things, and I think the big difference that they make. Samer, when we look at women's representation and just listening from what Daria is saying there, it has certainly changed, it has improved, but again, I think we need a lot more focus and encouragement. What do you think needs to be done differently? Because I think things are happening, but as you say, here we are, 2022, and we're having this conversation.
Absolutely. Things definitely need to be done differently. I mean, as a social enterprise, what I do, She is Arab, is obviously aligned with the SDGs, particularly with a focus on SDG 5, which is, of course, gender equality, and specifically economic empowerment and participation of women. And this is a major problem. This is a global audience, so I'm unfortunately sharing that the Arab world fares worse when it comes to female workforce participation. We are at rates lower than 20%. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. So when it comes to not seeing women in leadership, we don't see women as role models. We need to work on offsetting attrition rates. We need to work on investing in retention rates of women. We see women, specifically in the mid to senior level category, leaving their jobs for whatever reason, whether it's maternity, whether it's policy making, and I'll leave the policies to the policymakers around me. But obviously there's a lot of work to be done. Proudly, as a social enterprise, we're driving this particular focus on workforce participation.
Leila, if I may, or Leia, when we look at, why women are just following on, why are they not, why are they missing in so many leadership positions? I mean, you're an exception to the case here, and we look at a big country, we look at Latin America, we look at changes that are happening, indeed, all over the world, but you still think that we're really missing a lot where the decision-making is happening.
That's right. Thank you so much, first of all. Good day to everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here next to such an amazing panel. So thank you for the invitation. Yes, indeed, I think many women are still missing in leadership positions. Over the past 2 or 3 centuries and throughout our globalized work cultures, we have learned to sort of value or consistently favor certain traits or characteristics that are more likely to be common among men. For example, we favor aggressiveness over responsiveness, we favor competitiveness over collaboration, rationality over intuition, analytical thinking over synthesis. But in reality, many of these traits are truly complementary. We all have it in certain amounts. And the fact is that, for example, when you think of synthesis, apart from requiring analytical thinking, you also require a capacity to be able to combine different ideas into a inclusive proposal, into a inclusive proposal that brings together all that set of ideas in a way that has a lot of logic. And even so, that even when we understand that, we are still seeing many institutions, very serious institutions, subscribing to the belief that to be a leader, that to be a good leader or to be successful as a leader, we must have this aggressiveness to show strength, manly strength. And this is a somewhat lopsided truth, right? First, it's also unfortunate because it puts the responsibility of achieving gender equity in leadership on women, because it sort of suggests it is you the problem. It is you that have to be more aggressive. Secondly, it implies that there is something fundamentally wrong about alternative forms of leadership, which is also not great. And third, it ignores the many barriers that we face as professionals, as professional women daily. Those barriers do exist. And when I think of the incredible legacies of so many women, all of you, many people in the panel, but people like Christine Lagarde, like Margaret Thatcher, like our most recent Angela Merkel, Michelle Bachelet in Latin America, and many other women, they have made amazing contributions to policy making into the world. And these contributions are central to sustainable development and to attaining the sustainable development goals. So women are central. And I would like to focus in particular in one of these leaders, which is Christine Lagarde, which is dear to my heart because being a former Minister of Finance, her work has been tremendously impactful. Because, number one, she showed to the world that women can also lead the most important financial institution in the world. And not only they can lead, but they can do it better than men. She actually rescued the IMF from a crisis scenario, and she did a fantastic job. She opened the door for other women. So today we have the second female managing director, Kristalina Georgieva. They also have, so this permeated throughout the institution. They also have the first chief economist. She's doing a fantastic job, and now she has been named the deputy managing director of the IMF, the first female having that position as well. So this is sort of permeating throughout a very important institution. But most importantly, her most, I believe, crucial contribution for development has been to broaden the scope of the work of the IMF in finances. So the IMF today is also thinking about the governance indicators. The governance indicators are underlying all the financial institutions, but pretty much development. And as she called it, this is the bedrock of sustainable development. And finally, ministers of finance across the world, which happen to still be mostly men, actually began to listen to this very loud and clear message about the need to focus on governance indicators and to focus also on addressing corruption, which is very rampant in many developing countries.
Indeed, and I do think when women do get to those top positions, they are listened to, and I think it's very encouraging for every other woman to follow in that as well. Talk to me, Antonia, when we look at the work that you do at UNICEF. Really, your role, your remit is looking after every child. But talk to me about how you would address gender issues, and particularly when we're thinking of children in many ways.
Well, indeed, as you know, UNICEF is working across 190 countries and territories to protect the rights and the well-being of every child. But gender equality is not just one of a myriad issues that we're looking after. It's actually central to the point that gender equality outcomes are in special focus across all strategic goal areas, from education and healthcare through violence against children, all the way to things like access to water and sanitation. In fact, 15% of all spending, all program spending in UNICEF has to be allocated to the advancement of gender equality. And there's a special review that every country office has to undertake in each programmatic cycle on gender issues and the advancement of gender equality specifically. And there's an annual report prepared for the board and for the wider public on how well we've done on these results. So gender equality is actually something that's there in every walk of life, whatever issue, whatever problem you look at, there's always a female face. There's always special barriers that women and girls face. And this is something that is represented throughout our work across the world.
And if you look back, I suppose, in terms of, the role of UNICEF before, has this now come to the fore in maybe the last 5-10 years? Or, is the issue of gender equality more visible there and you're doing more about it?
I think the issue has been there for a long time, but as the rest of the world is possibly recognizing the importance, probably UNICEF is giving increasing emphasis year to year. But also what we have seen, unfortunately, and this issue has been raised in this conversation before as well, is how COVID, the pandemic, has set back gender equality in a lot of ways, whether it's child marriage, or violence, gender-based violence against women, so on. So there's a long list of areas where actually we've gone backwards over the past 2 years. And obviously an organization like ours, as other human rights organizations, are having to pay special attention to make sure that this doesn't get worse and that we can get back on track.
Yeah, so the work that had to be done already is almost now double, so to speak, that we'll have to look more of it. We can talk more about that in a minute. Lena, we look, and Summer had just said there, I think also in terms of so much more needs to be done, but you actually, I think, believe that we need a complete overhaul. We need to transform systems really, rather than, I suppose, look at policies and programs and that. Talk to me a little bit about in terms of, how do we change the situation that I suppose in many ways might have led to pervasive gender inequalities. Where does that start?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think that we have been, with all of these global efforts towards gender equality, policies, interventions, programs, I think we have to start to ask ourselves, with all of these efforts, why is it still going to take another 135 years, according to the World Economic Forum Gender Gap Report, to achieve gender equality? And this is, again, because of the pandemic has worsened. So the year before it was 99 years, but still, really, who has time to wait an entire century for gender equality? So one sort of perspective or way to think of it is that perhaps while policies and programs and interventions are very important, maybe we have concentrated a disproportionate effort on these programs and not enough on actually transforming the very systems and structures that lead to pervasive gender and any other inequality in the first place. So if we're taking a systems thinking approach to inclusive development, I think we need to look beyond only inclusive access and inclusive participation, and we need to find the leverage points or the acupuncture points in a system where one small change can make a huge shift in everything. And part of that is really looking at how do we restructure the entire system and rewrite the rules that are currently dictated by the few and therefore overlook the many. And I'll just end with a quote that I love by Buckminster Fuller, who's an American innovator and polymath, where it's not just about fighting the existing reality, but it's about building new models that make the old obsolete. And that's what I think we need to do more of in terms of system transformation.
Helen, if I can come back to you, and when we look at, and we've heard from a few people here in terms of the impact of the pandemic, we don't hear a lot in terms when it comes to the impact of the pandemic that, you know, the sort of, that men are suffering too much. They're suffering, yes, because they've lost their jobs, but, you know, where the society is suffering in general. But there seems to be an issue here in the fact that the pandemic has actually set back a lot of the progress that has been made. How do you think that is? Do you see that from, you know, your viewpoint when you know, glance out on the wider world rather than just looking at New Zealand?
Oh, definitely. And at the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health, we've issued a call to action around all our partners to call for the issues which have arisen to be addressed. For example, if you look at the loss of employment during the pandemic, the rate of loss of women's jobs is about 5% as compared to men's 3.9%. Now, women were more likely to be in heavily affected sectors, such as retail and hospitality. So there has been a differential impact. And there's also been some studies suggesting, and I think this is right, that when you move to online work, and particularly in pandemic conditions where often childcare wasn't available, even if it were available in normal times, very, very hard for women who still disproportionately have the care of children to maintain their jobs in those situations. So we've seen more women exiting the workforce because of that. But if we really come down to basics, the WHO surveyed countries about the health services which were disrupted in that early phase of the pandemic, around the March-June period of 2020, and about 30% of countries reported that the sexual and reproductive health services had been impacted. Now, what does that mean? It means women can't access their contraception, can't access safe abortion if it were available in their country, may not be able to access safe birthing facilities, not have adequate prenatal and postnatal care. So there's certainly a view at UN Population Fund that when the figures finally come in, and there's always a lag in getting information on these things, that maternal mortality will have risen because of these differential impacts. And what this tells us is that as we build resilience of our health systems and societies to fight pandemics, we need to ensure that there are essential services like the post that always gets through. Well, essential health services always need to be there, come what may. And among those essential services are these services that women need. They need access to their family planning, the whole range of sexual and reproductive health services. So that's just one other kind of example. UNESCO forecast probably about a year and a half ago that 11 million girls would never return to school, having left during the lockdowns, and because of the impoverishment of families. And sadly, for many of those girls, it will probably have been a catalyst for an early marriage, maybe a forced marriage, maybe a pregnancy earlier than they would have wanted, dashed hopes from not being able to continue schooling. These are very, very serious impacts. And then, as I mentioned earlier, during the pandemic, domestic violence did surge across countries at all levels of development, and not everywhere are there adequate services for women trying to flee a violent perpetrator in the home. And when they're locked into that home with the violent perpetrator and their children, it's pretty terrifying.
Staggering figures there. I think 11 million girls might never go to school. Ambassador Kathleen, and in fact, an area of education I want everybody, I think, to contribute to as well. You know, how important is education? And I talk about education, yes, of, you know, girls at school, but then education wider. And what happens when women are educated, and what difference does it make in terms of their contribution to the world?
I would like to start with a very personal experience. In UNESCO colors, I used to work in Senegal, where we had programs, capacity building programs for girls and women. And we realized, talking to these girls and women who probably couldn't write before or read, and they were there to enroll to these programs, that after that, they were taught some capacities and they made their role within the family. So the man looked at them from another perspective because they realized that they are bringing value into the family. So everything starts with education. I mean, within the SDGs, the way we talk about gender equality as an overarching principle, education is an overarching principle, because how on earth could we talk about, for example, the collaboration, which is so very needed for the fulfillment of the SDGs. In collaboration, again, the role of women is very influential. But just think about the other overarching principle in the SDGs, and this is that we have to understand each other. We know that these are global goals. And as Christina said, every country has to have the policy to fulfill it. Having said that, these are global goals. So because of that, everything starts with education. First of all, to understand ourselves, to understand each other, to take into account that we think in another way. And then it comes the way how we can collaborate with each other. And if we don't collaborate, we can never fulfill the SDGs.
Yeah. I'd like to continue this conversation on education. Daria, maybe come in here. And again, you know, when we look at education, where does it go at certain ages? You know, I think we all look at a time when we were, you know, we were obliged to choose one stream or the other, you know. And for me, my stream was certainly not going to be science and math. I wasn't heading in that direction. But I made that decision very early. Yeah. You know, so how do we actually encourage women to stay within education, because they can foresee something a lot different at the end of the tunnel, so to speak?
I completely agreed with all previous statements, because everything starts with education. I completely agree with that, because education is a crucial key for success, but which is more important, education is a key for independence. And independence is very important. Only independent woman can make some decision by her own, which is very, very important. In my country, it's a very interesting situation now, because in the Republic of Serbia in most recent years, women are more educated than the men. For example, each year about 15% more females achieve the university degree compared to the males. But when we analyze the situation on the labor market, we can see that women still have unfavorable position despite they are more educated. For example, the employment rate is less for about on average 20% among women, meaning that highly educated women doesn't mean that they have a better chance on the employment market. But really, we need to encourage all the women to be educated, to improve themselves at each point of their life, because we know that the education is long long time, and I think that all life learning, and it is very important. Unfortunately, especially in some minorities, such as Roma population, it is still a big issue because a lot of girls don't have any opportunity to be educated, and all of us need to talk about it more.
Antonia, let's talk a little bit about education, because again, it starts at the child, and it starts also the education to the parents to make sure that their children are educated as well. So, I mean, education it's a wide sphere that everybody needs to be involved.
Indeed, in fact, in UNICEF, when we look at any issue, the key is usually lying there somewhere in education. And if you look at the future of the world or future generations, one of the main reasons we need to educate women, for instance, is because educated women are likely to have their children later in life, so they'll be healthier pregnancies and healthier children, and they're likely to have fewer children, which is better for the sustainability of the planet, and more educated children, which again is better for all of society. There has been progress in this area, actually. I think that also needs to be said, that we have achieved that 2/3 of the world's countries now have equal opportunities in education for boys and girls. And this is great, but still 29 million children of secondary school age are out of school across the world. In conflict areas, girls are 2.5 times less likely to have access to education than boys are. And 22% of the girls across the world between the ages of 15 and 19 are neither in education or in work across the world still, which is clearly an issue, and an issue that is linked to other ones like child marriage, which is still affecting 650 million women and girls living in our world today, and an issue that has actually been quite severely impacted by the COVID crisis as well. This is also linked to the fact that complications during pregnancy is the second leading cause of death for young women because of the fact that they have their children too early as a result of child marriage. And women and girls are also more subject to gender-based violence, sexual violence, which means that 1 out of 20 young girls in the world today have already been a victim of sexual violence. Girls are 77% more likely to contract HIV, and as a result of all of this, mental health is also more of a concern for young women than men, and suicide is the third leading cause of death, mostly for girls in the world today. So I started on a positive note that progress has been made, and it is important to know that it's possible. We can get there, but there's still a long way to go, and the challenge has increased over recent years.
And sadly, I think we all, you know, when we're not as close to the issues and problems as you are, and many of you working in this area, I mean, it does come as a shock. So it is something, as you say, yes, we all need to be aware of. I know everybody wants to talk about this one. Christina, please. And
yes, now that we are talking
in.
about education, and we are so close to a country where half of the population are being deprived of all rights, Afghanistan. So I think this brings exactly to one of the most tremendous crises that women are facing in a country, and that we basically are forgetting, or we are not having the right instruments to enter into such a tremendous tragedy and work and advance. We know that 97% of the population of Afghanistan is at the brink of starvation and not having access to the basics, and women are being thrown out, girls thrown out of schools. So this is an exact example where when we bring SDGs, the vision, we need to download to specific actions. And I wanted to bring the case of Afghanistan because it's mind-blowing to think what is going on so close as we are in Dubai, and Afghanistan is just quite close to us. Second, that's why when I was talking about policies, I would like to refer to a specific one, which is a feminist foreign policy, which is the one that we adopted In Spain, while I was state secretary under the leadership of the previous minister, which is now continued by the current minister.
And it was called this, was
exactly, feminist foreign policy.
Okay. Was there any backlash?
And guess who launched it?
Okay.
The Prime Minister. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez gathered a group of women, but also in a big public event, he launched a feminist foreign policy because we have to take care of violence, crises, conflicts around the world. We have to take care about gender violence, even in our countries, where we are highly educated, where we have access to lifelong learning. We suffer gender violence in our neighborhoods. We have women being just killed by their partners, etc. We need to fight on human rights and gender rights and women's rights. The case of Afghanistan. We need to have more women at the top of the institutions. We were talking how it is hard to go to the top and only very few are able to be there. How is it possible? Half of the graduates of the law schools in Spain are women, but we don't have the governing body that leads justice being formed by women. 90% are men in the case of Spain. And we need economic empowerment. So a feminist foreign policy was basically defined to enter into each one of these specific issues I was talking. And I'm looking at, for example, our friend from Paraguay. There is an issue which we've detected in Spain that the majority of the trafficked women coming to Spain, being manipulated by the mafias, were either from Colombia and Venezuela or Paraguay. We signed an agreement to work specifically on the root causes so that we could not only protect and save these women, but also prevent. So very specific issues. I go for strong policies that have specific plans and that can change the reality.
Lena, let me bring you in here. Everybody can talk on this, don't worry, please, please. But, you know, when we look at education, I mean, surely education can help in terms of equality and empowerment. But is this good enough? And just keep it in the, you know, educational sort of focus for the moment.
Yeah, first of all, I really love this feminist foreign policy.
Yes.
I've never heard that before. So I want to maybe offer another perspective on education, and maybe I'll frame it with a confession or something that I struggle with, which is every time I have to make the business case for diversity and inclusion, I feel very conflicted. Because on the one hand, yes, you know, diversity and inclusion does add trillions to the economy. It does increase shareholder value. It does increase innovation. But it's also a moral imperative, and we're not making the business case for men. So why should we be having to make the business case for gender or any kind of equality? And then it really comes down to this fundamental crisis of values, that any social and environmental issue we have is really a crisis of values. And if we're planting these seeds of a self-serving, what's in it for me kind of justice, is that really sustainable in creating, you know, long-term change? So when it comes to education, I think it's equally important to not just upskill and think about 21st century skills, but also 21st century values. What are the values that we need to cultivate? And in the education systems, where over a generation we can see this shift where inequality is no longer present.
And again, so much that has to be done there. Samar, talk to us. We can just close off this in a moment on education because there is so much. But also, you know, every country goes at it in a different way. And if you can combine perhaps your response, Samar, in terms of, you know, driving gender equality as well, and, you know, in terms of education, where is there a huge lack of coordination as well?
Sure. I'd like to just also comment that there is also Sweden and Canada, I believe, who have feminist policies, feminist trade policies, feminist foreign policies, as far as I know. With regards to education, I think it's not just about access to education. We have countries in the Arab world, for example, where women are, for example, more than 50% getting educated in STEM fields, but they end up jobless in the market. So there's a missing link there. And I think we need to address the issue of culture. Culture is a major impediment for women, not just in this region, but around the world. I mean, culture obviously varies everywhere. We need interventions that shift social norms and update perceptions of women's work. We need to view women differently. And for that, I'd just like to also say that culture sometimes dictates who gets educated and who doesn't, depending on the country. I would just like to quickly share a very short story. I took my son, who is now 6, last year to a pediatrician, and it so happens that his pediatrician is a man. When we had to go that day, this doctor wasn't available, so we ended up having to see a female pediatrician. So we saw her, we were done, on our way out. He looks up to me and says, "Mama, so when are we gonna go see the real doctor?" And to that, that was a jaw-dropping moment to me, someone who is working, on She is Arab, driving women's representation forward. So I really think the question of culture, what generation of the future are we building if we are not informing these young children, boys and girls, of what is the content that we're feeding them? It's not just education, and that's the beauty of the SDGs. We need to look at all 17 of them and not just education. So.
Leia, looking at the role of culture and also looking at how, education can change people's lives, but also, in terms of gender equality, when that change is there and it is welcomed and it's encouraged, the difference that it will make.
Well, thank you. So I think they have said so much already on education. Definitely education is a lifelong process and it starts at home. I think it's very tremendously important to teach our children to think about gender equity, our boys and our girls, to think of girls and boys as equal in terms of capacity, in terms of rights, and also in terms of obligations, and also to speak up for gender equity. In the case of Latin America, we have attained gender parity in terms of enrollment in primary education. We have also, we see now that girls are outnumbering boys in terms of secondary and tertiary education. But that is not to say that we have equity in terms of education. There are several barriers, invisible barriers, perhaps that might be social, that might be cultural, that might be historical disadvantages that are very much there and that need to be addressed. And one specific program that is today being implemented by an NGO in Paraguay is called Cuña TIC. Cuña means women in our native language, and TIC, information technology, is focusing specifically in a group of young rural girls, because a survey that was run found that these girls, by the time they reach the age of 12, there is a 50% decline in their interest in STEM. And obviously, when you realize that they have so many competing demands at home, their families are expecting them to care for their siblings, they are expecting them to clean their house, to cook, to care for the elderly. There is no time for STEM. There is no reason for me as a girl from a rural area to invest my time on that because I know what I'm supposed to do. So this program aims at early age working with girls to give them tools, critical thinking tools, and in particular, computational thinking as a problem-solving tool that can help them in practical ways, that can broaden their spectrum, that can broaden their opportunities, and so that they can see that there is something beyond what they are expected, perhaps at the heart of their family. So these are the sort of proactive policies that we need. There are many examples around the world, but we have to do more of that. And with regards to what also work, I have one very specific example, which is also related to education at a later age.
Yes.
It's about the transformation of the police force in Honduras. So there was a reform done that started in 2012. Reforms are always ongoing processes, but this reform started in 2012. Honduras, it was a very challenging scenario because Honduras was the most violent country in the world at the time. Literally the #1 most violent, the highest rate of homicide in the world. There was this intervention, and at the heart of the intervention, the most important pillar of the institutional transformation of the police force was a change in the curricula, a change in the educational system of the police force. And at the core of this was a change of going from a sort of military-style police into a community policing with gender equity at its core. And this was very interesting in a still today very conservative culture and society. And what this brought was a structural change in the whole police force. The way they are entering the police force is now merit-based. It's a competitive process, merit-based, that every person aspiring to become a police officer has to go through. It's also, it has changed also the program, the educational program, the curriculum, the profile of the police. And finally, it has also renewed the people that are training the police force. So now those individuals, men and women, are now have higher level of education. Second, are now about 50% female. So in a matter of 4 years, it went from something about 12% female to 54% female in terms of who is educating the police force. And that's sort of opening the minds. This was a sort of very close scenario full of men, and now all of a sudden women are teaching men and women how to be a policeman. And the extraordinary result of this, the results that you see is what is the most shocking. #1, there have been at least 4,000 police officers that have gone through this new system. 20% of those are women, so there is a renewal of the police force that is very important. Secondly, there was also the homicide rate, which was a very important indicator, went from 93 to 42.8 per 100,000 inhabitants in a matter of 3 years or so. So that's a tremendous decline.
Yes.
But most importantly, citizens' trust in police tripled over about 3 years, which is when it was measured. So the tripling of police trust is incredible and is tremendously important, being that security is such an important pillar of sustainable development.
And I think trust in, a system like police, like the government, like the education system, and trust even for children to know that they will get an education and that it will all, it will go well. I think that's a fabulous word to bring up. We only have a half an hour left.
If I might add something, just to say something very briefly.
Please.
That the absence of women in these areas causes an epistemological flaw in our way of conceiving policy.
Yes.
Because 50% of the knowledge is missing. And this example shows us how powerful that is. Yes.
Absolutely. I want to bring you back in here, Helen, if I might. And as I say, we only have half an hour. So if we can, I do want to take a few questions. So please, Rachel, where are you? Mohammed, also line them up for me, but let's get Helen here first. So keep an eye on, I think Rachel, Mohammed, Sami is there. They'll take a question for you. But a question I'd like to put to you, and maybe if you'll kind of maybe work this one into your next answer, whatever your next answer to the audience questions will be. What would the world look like if we were to achieve the SDGs by 2030? I mean, I think everybody thinks we're not quite going to get there, but particularly also, can we really look to achieve gender equality and empowerment for women under that, SDG, the goal 5 as well. So if it was all done, and if we got there, what kind of a different world could you perceive that we might all live in?
Well, for a start, it would be a lot more inclusive because you would see decision-making tables looking much more representative of the societies. And you would see many more women at those tables. Of course, it's not only women who are underrepresented. Many are underrepresented in their nation's decision-making, and we have to have an intersectional perspective on this as well. But we would be seeing many more women rising to the top of governments. You know, as we speak, you know, last figures I saw, still only around 1/4 of the world's parliamentarians were women. The numbers of women heads of state and government at any one time are generally not more than around 20, 21 or so. That doesn't shift so much. So we need to see these things change. We need to see women leaders across all spheres of life. But we need to see women able to make their own choices about their lives, not have other people make them for them, to be able to follow their dreams as to what they want to do, what they want to achieve in life, make their own decisions about who they marry, when they marry, how many children they have, certainly having full access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. So all of these things we would hope to see in a world that was achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And as I said, we've got some work to do and some catch-up to do to make these things a reality.
Kathleen, you want to come in here, please?
Yeah, I just would like to come in because I'm just missing three important elements. I mean, we talked a little bit about them, but if we are talking about women as an overarching principle in the SDGs, women empowerment and so on, first of all, the role of men in it. We have to address it. So we have actually in the United Nations created a movement, he for she, which is fantastic. I had a father who was he for she. I have a husband who is he for she. I raised a man, a boy who is he for she. And, you know, so this is, of course, very important that we have to do this fight, what we all have to walk through, together with men. It's very important that we find the men who are working with us, who are walking with us in that. Also, the element you already mentioned of the family is very important, especially now during the pandemic. We realized how important it is and how important it has been actually the role of women in the families. So, for example, in my country, in my part of the world, it is very much important to see the role of family and to have policies, actually government policies, through which within the family, women are encouraged and helped and supported to have the right work-life balance, because this is, of course, important for everybody. And the third thing I would like to bring into our conversation is fighting stereotype, because this is, of course, something like a disease, and this is in every culture. What are the stereotypes in our cultures? We don't have time for that, but I think we have to take it into consideration always.
Absolutely. We have a question here. Let me take it. Tell us who you are. And if you can direct your question, just because I want to get a few to one person, please.
So, hi, my name is Tanya Kapoor, and I wanted to ask my question to Christina. You had mentioned the situation in Afghanistan, and in reference to that, I wanted to understand how culture plays a role in foreign policy changes, where even the definition of liberation and emancipation varies from culture to culture. So how can that be taken into account when applying policy changes? Should the change come from within the culture so that there's more receptiveness to such change?
May I answer
Please,
right away? I think culture plays a role, but in the case of Afghanistan, we are not talking about culture. We are talking about human rights. And this is irrespectful of whatever culture. We know that half of the population there is being deprived of all rights, education, health, property, bank accounts, everything. So it is not a question of culture. It's a question that we, the developed countries, and women that have been advancing, and the international organizations, and the governments, democratic governments, have to ensure that things are done at the international level so that we do not allow this to happen again, and we have to work on it. And may I say, the civil society plays also a role. And I'm proud now to say now with Helen that we are mobilizing a group of women, global women leaders' voices, to ensure that those that don't have a voice do have the echo of their needs. And second, that we gather all the voices of the world, because wherever we are, in the most developed countries or in the less developed countries, or countries that have historic, cultural backgrounds different from each other, they are also advancing on what is progress and dignity. We talk about dignity.
Now, we do have 20 minutes left, so please think of a few questions for our great panel up here. Samar, I still like us all to be maybe forward-looking a little bit in terms of, you know, when the SDGs are all reached, and when we have, you know, when we have SDG 5 up there as a priority, and we're not having the struggle of a conversation in terms of, you know, the things that are all wrong. What do you see different? And again, maybe bring that culture and tradition perhaps in there. Because I don't think we destroy culture when things change. You know, I think we look at, I grew up in Ireland where, you know, expectations for girls, and even when I was growing up, my father presumed I might be a teacher or a nurse, and that would be good for him. That would be enough that I should look for. But actually, you know, when things change there, the culture in the country never changed. So it's the meaning of culture as well. But talk to us a little bit about how things could be and what would happen.
Sure. Well, I think, I mean, obviously it would be a dream, as the Right Honourable Helen Clark said, it would be a dream to see the SDGs achieved, hopefully. But I think a lot needs to be done to accelerate it. And for starters, like as a social enterprise, for example, the work of social enterprises is not accounted for. When you look at the measurements of the SDGs, for example, it is not accounted for. So how do we really, are we really measuring progress properly? Are we really measuring progress accurately? That's a question to put out there as well. In terms of what other institutions can do, or what other, you know, what other governments can do, obviously there's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of collaboration. I think the problem is that also the ecosystem of all the organizations working to drive gender equality is generally fragmented. We have a very fragmented ecosystem of people working in silos, or organizations working in silos, where a lot more collaboration is required. So I really believe we need to leverage collaboration, leverage partnerships with different organizations, bring in the social enterprises, bring in the grassroots organizations. You know, don't just throw the responsibility on the UN organizations and on governments alone. But I do think the future is bright. I mean, even though I mentioned that you know, the number of workforce representation for women here is bleak, for example, but I could tell you that we are in a country that has a very progressive, forward-looking government. Just a couple of days ago, they actually announced a fantastic pledge to increase representation of women in leadership by 2025 to 30%. And 18 private sector companies signed that pledge. We need more of such collaborations, more of such partnerships to drive us forward and get us there.
Antonia, talk to me a little bit about the work that you're doing at UNICEF too around employment and career opportunities, and particularly for women with young children. And I'll come to that question, so think about what it is and who do you want to direct it to.
Sure, I would gladly do that, also because I can work your previous question into it about the SDGs. Yes. I do think it's impossible that the world as a whole would reach that goal by 2030, primarily because of all the global inequality we have there, and obviously looking at countries like Afghanistan.
And it's 8 years, we forget, you know, and
8
years
is nothing. So I use the word impossible, looking at the globe, but I think even looking at the most, you know, advanced countries, I think it's still unlikely to be able to reach full equity. And I do come from a place like Katalin was describing, where there are a lot of opportunities already for women, so we're definitely not at the back of the line for this. But even if we look at our corporate world, or the world of employment, even a country like Hungary, which is in the middle of the EU, you know, democratic, developed, and so on, we are number 131st on the list of 153 countries when we look at the wage gap for women still. When you look at boards with women on them, it's still 14.5%. Corporates with women in senior leadership, 20%, 20.5%. Obviously, the wage gap and the inequality grows with age. The worst off are women between 35 and 44, actually. There's a lot of reasons for this, and we don't have time to go into them all, but I'm sure you'd all agree that having to take more career breaks because of children is one reason. Asking for less in the first place is another one. And also doing more unpaid work around the household is a significant reason. So what we've done with UNICEF Hungary is a survey about career opportunities and employment opportunities for women with young children. You might ask why an organization like UNICEF is doing this in the first place, and shouldn't we be looking after children? But in fact, it is a fundamental truth that women invest more resources, more money into their children. So if you want to look after the well-being of children, you should also look after the opportunities for women. And also only women who have a stable background themselves, who can balance home requirements with a career and work opportunities, can provide a stable background for children. So we wanted to know what are the opportunities for the return to work. What we found is that there are incredibly contradictory expectations from society, and I would expect that this is not true only of Hungary. When we asked people if they thought both parents should work, 92% said that they thought that they should, that both women and men should contribute to the household by bringing home a salary. But when we asked whether women with young children should work, 85% said that ideally they don't think women with young children should return to the workplace. When we asked whether women with young children were full value as employees, as a workforce, 73% of the population, so clearly this includes women as well, said that they didn't think a woman with a young child would provide full value as an employee. And 75% of Hungarians thought that children under 3 actually suffer if their mother is going back to employment. We also know, obviously, that unpaid work around the household is still primarily done by women, even in a country like ours. And as we were doing this survey, which consisted of several rounds, the pandemic broke out, the COVID-19 pandemic. So we started asking about how this affects family dynamics. And not a great surprise, we found that the extra housework fell primarily on the women, 20% versus 6% only for men. A lot of the men said that, you were saying this before, that life hasn't actually changed that significantly for them because the women were taking care of all the issues like homeschooling for the children. When it came to how fathers and mothers have contributed, it was actually 50-50 equal opportunities when it came to having to spend more time playing with the children, which is great. But when we asked about helping with the schoolwork, this was done primarily by the women and not the men, not the fathers. So I don't have time to go into the full survey, but there is one very basic conclusion which actually leaves me with a very specific personal responsibility as well. Nothing will really change until the men do. Until they help their wives and their daughters and they play a more active role at home and in the household, and they share the burdens equally. And the reason why I say this is a personal responsibility is that I also have a son. He's actually sitting right here in the audience. And how I bring him up and how we all bring the men up is a large part of the story.
We have 15 minutes in the entire conversation left, so I'll take a very, very short comment. Very short, please.
Very short comment. Yes, things won't change until men do it, but until we help them do the change. Exactly. And I'll give you an example of that change. Very recently, Spain adopted a legislation that gives free time, well, not free time, is when a child is born, women get 3-4 months, and men get exactly the same. And they have to spend it. Otherwise, they will lose it. And they are forced to spend it. So they have to stay with the baby.
And many countries, I think, are doing that.
This is a way to help men to assume...
Line up my next question. We have another question here.
I have to react. May I just one sentence, please? It is very important because in my country, you can stay at home with your child for 2 or 3 years. But it's not only the mother, it can be also the father. And that's very important.
And again, then a debate comes on who pays for that and, you know, the corporate paying, the government paying. Let's, please, our question from the audience. Final question, I'm afraid. Thank you. Keep it short for me, please.
For sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Moncada. I'm an NYU student, but I'm also a UN women activist from Venezuela and currently a regional leader from Girl Up. My question is in relation to the role of young generations in decision-making spaces. We have been discussing about the role of women in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, and as we've seen recently, young people have a lot to say and a lot to contribute. So my question would be directed at former Prime Minister of New Zealand. The question is how the international community can include young people, young generations in not only speeches and photos at these conferences, but actually including them as equal stakeholders in decision-making spaces.
Okay. Helen Clark, Right Honourable. And we only do have a few minutes, so if I can ask you to keep the response on that brief.
Yes, look, over the years, and I'm sure others who have been at the UN in New York will confirm this, there has been more space opened up to young people at the United Nations. There's been an annual forum, usually run, I understand, around January, where young people come from all around the world for input. I think also something that national governments could consider is whether they make space in their delegations to the General Assembly each year, space for young people to come and be part of delegations and part of the decision-taking there. I've also noticed over the years going to, for example, many climate change conferences or other such UN conferences that youth voices have been quite strong. So what is needed, of course, is to support youth participation. Young people do need financial support to be able to be there, and also paid internships at the United Nations are very helpful for young people. Otherwise, those internships are reserved to a privileged minority. But I think there are quite a lot of ways to engage, and young people also have power of voice through social media for input and spreading ideas. Some agencies do crowdsource ideas for policies and programming through social media platforms. So, yeah, many ways, and they should all be pursued so that young people's voices are heard.
And I think also here at Expo 2020, we've seen a lot of involvement with the youth, a lot of the programs, particularly around global goals. I mean, definitely, they've all been very, very encouraged, and you know, there's been huge participation. So, and I'm beginning to see it. I was at a conference in Saudi Arabia just a couple of months ago, whereby there was a big energy conference with all of the key players. And on that, there was an entire youth day looking at energy. So people are taking it seriously, and I think it's beginning to. So just watch out, I think, you know, because there's probably more of it around, but it's about, yes, making sure you're all informed. I have to start wrapping this up. It's breaking my heart, ladies. Believe me, I know there's lots more I want to hear from you. But I want like a closing sentence, and I do, because there are 8 of you. Please ask, because we can't hang around for another 20 minutes as much as I'd love to. I'm going to start with you, Lena, if I may. Just hope for the future. What do we all do, and what can we all do to actually take action and make things better?
So I think the systems transformation, building the new models, 21st century values and not only 21st century skills. So being the change, not just doing the change. And finally, we can't talk about empowering women without talking about redistributing power and not just wealth and economic resources. And power doesn't just mean leadership positions, because you can be a minister or a CEO and still lack power.
So I like that word, give power back, take power from the empowerment. Antonia.
Well, I think there's a lot that we could do for women and that we need to. Education for me is definitely the most important to concentrate on, and everything else will flow from there.
Leia, talk to just a closing word that you know, inspires us all.
I agree 100%. Education, education, education. There is nothing more powerful. But I have to say also and emphasize something that has been said already, which is the important role that men need to play in this fight for equity. And I think that they have 50% of the work. We have 50%, they have 50%. This is a team effort. Men are not the enemy, they are actually our allies. It is not a zero-sum game. We actually all gain as humanity from achieving gender equity. I think men have a great deal to gain from this. And I think when men speak up, it's actually well received, yes, because there is not a perceived conflict of interest in their message, and that's very powerful.
Rightly so, and I think we do see when we have male leaders of companies, putting a strong message out there, everybody else very quickly. It seems like sometimes they need permission to come on board. Samar, talk to me in terms of, again, just a quick closing sentence to finish
Very
this
quick.
off.
I will just say to everyone, apply a gender lens to everything that you do so we can actually mainstream gender perspectives. So anything, in hiring, in investing, in raising up your children, just apply a gender lens and always think of the importance of women's representation. Thank you.
Daria, again, a closing word from you, please.
Okay, I will rephrase one of the most successful woman leader, Margaret Thatcher, who said, if you want something said, ask the man. If you want something done, ask the woman.
Nice.
How good. Yes, indeed. Christina, please.
Get the lens, put the gender lens, but it has to be inclusive,
Yes.
a lens of inclusion, a lens of equality. Bring the men on board and ensure you have a mechanism to evaluate the transformations. One by one, we will get there.
Helen, again, very quickly in terms of where you see optimism for us and what we need to do to make sure we're heading there.
We're making progress, so we can't give up. We have to keep going. But the closer we get to gender equality, the nastier the backlash will be. And I think we're seeing that in a number of places around the world. So we have to be resilient. We're asking for an equal share of power. Some people see that as them having to give things up.
Wow.
And as has just been said, it's not a zero-sum game. The whole society is better off for gender equality.
Indeed. Ambassador Catalina, I'm giving you the closing words, so no pressure.
A message to young girls: be a dreamer, be an optimist, and be an activist. That's my message. And a message to successful women: never forget your journey. We have to help all the other women as well.
Yeah. Exactly. I like that very much too, that we all have that responsibility, I think, and we can all help each other when it comes down to, I think, bringing men into the equation, making sure that we're all moving in the same direction, because ultimately it's about creating a planet for everybody, and a planet whereby we can all live a better life and, we move in a just transition. There's so much, I think, going on at the moment. Yes. So we really need to make sure that everybody can raise up and enjoy a better life for the future. Just before we close, I just want to thank you all for attending. Thank you so much to all of our people online. We have a wonderful community online that joins us every time at these World Majlis, and we're always very happy that you're here, and I know you're from around the world, so as somebody started off with a good morning, good afternoon, good evening to who all of you are, again, it's been very, very important to be here at the Hungarian Pavilion. It's wonderful that we've been here. I really do want to thank all of our people here. It's been absolutely great to have with us the Right Honourable Helen Clark, Ambassador Catalina, thank you so much. Christina, great to have you here. Antonia, Samar, also Leia, Lina, and Daria, thank you all for being with us so much. And again, thanks to our team who organized this. We have a fabulous team who put the World Majlis together, Federica Busa, and indeed all of her people. And a little goodbye to one of our team, Jessica Bland. Where's Jessica? We're going to miss her. She's been the strategy and content lead, and she's heading back to Cambridge University to just continue existential risk whereby we'll probably have her up here on the panel the next time, but it's been so wonderful to have her here and have everybody. Just before we go, I'd like now to invite the Consul General to just close a little word from Hungary. I believe he's with us here. Indeed he is. Please, a very warm welcome for Mr. Szabos Tatar. Thank you.
Very much.
Szabos, thank you so much.
Thank you. Dear Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it has been our utmost privilege to host and witness such a powerful event and topics in the Hungarian Pavilion. I can personally and also in a professional capacity confidently can say that it was very insightful and fruitful and eye-opening at the same time for me, and I'm sure of it you feel the same way. I want to be very, very brief, but I'm sure of it that this event and this powerful topic has left a very, very positive footmark and footprint in the Expo. I'm sure of it, conversation will continue until the end of Expo and well beyond. From my side, it is my great pleasure, and I want to take this opportunity to invite all of you and our panelists for a Hungarian exhibition guided tour. We are showcasing Hungary's biology and thermal-rich mineral waters, and we brought this to you in the most sustainable way possible without the use of a drop of water. So I am sure of it, that's a very, very exciting experience. If you would do the honor and join me, maybe after some photographs is being taken on stage, I believe. We will be departing from behind the stage. There is an exit. My hostess team will guide you through. And once again, thank you so much for all the panelists and for all the guests and visitors to join us today and witness this fantastic event. We are really, really honored and privileged to have been given a chance to host today's event. So thank you so much.
And thank you so much for having us. It's been wonderful. So unfortunately, the Right Honourable Helen Clark can't join us, but you have a lovely sea there behind you. It's not quite Lake Balaton, but we thank you for being with us, and hopefully the next time you come, unless you come for March, until March though, we won't be able to show you around the Hungarian Pavilion. But once again, thank you for being with us. Thank you for joining from New Zealand, and again, thanks to my panel. So maybe Andrea and Szabos will come on stage for a picture with us. So thank you all so much. So here. So, bravo.